In this example, we're going to talk about the grid method. We've already learned the pack method and how we can just pack widgets into a main window. But we are going to talk about the grid method. So if I were to run this right here, you see I have 3 buttons, button 1, button 2, button 3, and they're all packed in on top of each other, right? But let's say we actually wanted to use the grid method instead. The grid method is a good way to do this, right? So I can say, let's go ahead and let's close out of this. Let's use the grid method. So I'll say grid, and grid. Now in a grid, you can set columns and rows, right? So columns are up and down, right? And rows are left to right. So let's say I want this in row 0, column equal to 0. And button 2, let's say I want row is equal to 0, and let's have column equal to 1, so still in the same row, but rather than the first column, it's going to be right next to it. Remember, row 0 is actually the first column. Computers started counting at 0. So row 0 is actually going to be my top row at the very top. So the first column is going to be button 1, next to it there. But let's say I want this one in row 1 and set column equal to 0. Right, so I should have 2 buttons next to each other and 1 button below it. Let's go ahead and run it. Okay, and sure enough, I've created different rows and columns. So let's look at button 1. Button 1 is in row 0, which is the top row. Okay, column 0, which is the first all the way left column. This one's in row 0, column 1. This one's in row 1, column 0. If I were to say, let's go ahead and put this in row 1, column 1, and run this again, right? Notice that the button shows up right there in the column right below button 2 because they have the same column. What if I say like column 3, which is further right? So I push it over there. Sure enough, it's in column 3. So this is column 0, column 1. Since there really is no column 2 right here, it recognizes it as there's actually a column, but there's nothing in there. So if I were to push it over and add another button, let's just say like button 4 dot grid, and we'll set it in row 0, but we'll say this is actually in column 2. That will push the 3rd button over there. So let's go ahead and run this. Right. Oh, I had never even made that button, so that's probably why. Button 4 is equal to button. I'm going to throw that in the root, and we'll change the text, and we'll set that to button 4. And then I'm going to go ahead and run this. Right, and what that does is that puts it in column 2. The reason why originally, when I didn't have this button right here, the reason why it was pushed all the way over here was because it recognized, all right, you don't have a column 2, so I'm going to push over as far left as possible. I didn't have anything above it already in that column. I didn't distinguish that. So this is how you would actually be able to set it up via a grid instead of just packing things in there. You can organize them a lot better, a lot nicer this way. So grid view is used a lot. So is the pack method, but by using the grid method, you can organize it in rows and columns, organize all your widgets, and that's how you would use the grid method.